it's happening. Omicron is everywhere, literally. Every state plus D.C. now reporting at least one case. And this is a real nightmare before Christmas for our healthcare workers, because across the country, more people are going into the hospital. But there may be a glimmer of good news out of South Africa. We'll talk about why cases there are going down already. Plus, you know those medical questions you tweeted and Facebooked and Instagrammed to us? We're going to answer them live. And millions of people slamming a 110-year sentence for the truck driver involved in a deadly Colorado crash, including even the judge who delivered that sentence. Will the backup from celebrities like Kim Kardashian be enough to get the governor to step in? Plus, it may seem blindingly obvious that while there's a time and a place for video games, playing behind the wheel is not the time or the place. But federal investigators think Tesla may need a bit of a reminder. We're going to explain that new investigation. We're also going to give you the backstory on that mysterious Havana Syndrome 5 years after it first emerged. But how do you get answers about something you can't see from government officials who don't want to talk about it? Our Andrea Mitchell knows, and she'll tell us. And could DNA give us the answer to who killed JonBenet Ramsey? Why cops are just now using it to try and crack a 25-year-old cold case later in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and you know who's really tired of this pandemic? Healthcare workers. Because while Omicron seems to be milder than other variants so far, it's spreading so fast, it's still putting a strain on a lot of hospitals, with those numbers up 14% in the last 2 weeks. You see it here, according to an NBC News analysis. ICU hospitalizations are up 9%. But here's a bright spot. The FDA today approved the country's first COVID treatment pill from Pfizer. You take it when you're infected, and it's apparently something like 89% effective at preventing people from going into the hospital or from dying. And now what we're seeing are some officials putting in place some new rules to try to keep those healthcare staffers healthy and working. With California Governor Gavin Newsom just in the last few hours rolling out his new mandate that requires hospital employees to be not just vaxxed, but boosted too.
I think it's the wise move in this context that we need to make sure we don't have staffing shortages. We need to keep all of you healthy and safe. And again, the best way to do that is to get boosted.
He's justifying that move with numbers like these from California, showing the risk to unvaccinated people is a whole lot more than for people who do have the shots. We've got Steve Patterson on the ground in L.A. at LAX, actually, to talk travel. Dr. John Torres will break down some medical questions from you, our loyal viewers, a little bit later. But we're going to start with our medical reporter, Erica Edwards, who's been all over this. And, Erica, I want to read a little bit from this piece from one of our colleagues, Daniela Silva, about the stress that hospitals are under again. This is from a hospital CEO in Minneapolis who tells us, quote, "We're at that point in time where there's so much death, they don't build hospital morgues to handle situations like this." You know, on the one hand, this sounds so reminiscent of those early days of the pandemic. But on the other, we know some hospital workers have dropped mandates to keep workers from leaving. How do you see this California plan from Governor Newsom playing into this?
Oh, that's a very complicated question, Hallie. You know, let's take a step back and just think about the greater good. Booster shots are good because they can help slow the spread of COVID-19. But it's really the unvaccinated driving the pandemic. And just as you mentioned, you know, hospital workers are worn out. They're already short-staffed. So if a healthcare worker is fired for not getting the booster, is that really contributing to that greater good? You know, because now you have an even greater reduced staff. Plus, you missed an opportunity for someone to encourage an unvaccinated person to go get the vaccine. Hallie?
So let me talk about these numbers out of South Africa. I think you make some good points here, Erica, but when you look at Omicron generally, right, there are people, the president, other officials who have talked about data out of South Africa, and we're starting to see it today. This is the curve from the last 90 days there, right? Look at that. Omicron cases started exploding right around December. But look what's happening. It looks like they are going down, right? U.S. has more people vaccinated than South Africa. When you look at that chart, Erica, are you hopeful that maybe here in the U.S., just like it seems like it's happening in South Africa, as fast as this Omicron surge happened, it'll drop?
It's so tempting to think that way because you're right. Some have suggested that, you know, because of the speed of Omicron, it's just going to burn itself out. But you have to remember, even though our population may have a higher vaccination rate, we still have about 30% of our population completely unvaccinated and therefore vulnerable to whatever variant is coming our way.
So when you say you're tempted to see it as good news, do you, or do you think it's a bit of a red herring?
I think it's great news. And I think even today, during the White House COVID briefing, Dr. Fauci said the same thing, but added that caveat. It's still a little bit too soon.
We talked about some of this early data, too, showing that Omicron can be more mild than what we've seen with, for example, the Delta variant, right? And one of our, I know, most clicked on stories of our website today comes from you and the folks in our medical unit talking about the symptoms of Omicron, because in some instances, they're actually different. Like, I look at the symptoms here: cough, fatigue or tiredness, congestion and runny nose. You don't have that loss of taste and smell that we heard about so much, previously. I have to tell you, like, I think a lot of people probably have at least one of those symptoms on a day-to-day basis, just living their lives, pandemic aside.
Right. That makes testing, even though they're hard to come by right now, even that more important, because not only do we have Omicron, we have Delta, we have the flu. So you know what? If you have something happening, it's best to go get tested, whether it's for the flu or COVID-19, as soon as you can, because there are now treatments available. One other symptom I wanted to point out just really quickly, because it seems like Omicron doesn't settle as deeply into our lungs, it might stay a little bit higher in the respiratory tract. You're more likely to be coughing up. Sounds gross, sorry. Coughing up a lot of that phlegm and then spreading it even faster.
Well, it's gross but important, I guess you could call it. Erica Edwards, thank you for the reality check there. Appreciate it. Glad to have you with us. Steve Patterson is over at LAX, where people there are trying to help people get vaccinated, as we're also seeing at Steve, this huge hub for international travel. They already have COVID testing sites in the airport to help with these travel requirements. Today, the vaccinations. Are a lot of people taking advantage of it there?
Yeah, Hallie, look, if you've ever had the pleasant experience of being at LAX during the holidays, you know how incredibly busy it can get. This place is a zoo. It's starting to sound like I'm backstage at a rock concert, just standing here. But basically, the strategy is mitigation right where people are traveling in. They expect 3.5 million travelers between now and January 1st on a busy day, which would be like Christmas Day, the day after Christmas, New Year's Day. About 200,000 people will come here on that day alone. So again, strategies, mitigation. That's the reason why I'm standing here. Take a look behind me. You see this is a pop-up vaccine clinic, and they're not trying to hide this. If you go far to the left, you'll see people coming off of a flight as we speak. So this is right in the middle of the arrivals terminal. Closer to my left, you'll see that line, people standing in line to get vaccinated. That line has been significantly longer, but every time we go on air, it dies down. That's a good thing, because this has been so efficient. They're getting people through this line really quickly. Right here, you see people waiting to be just waiting for observation, and then the actual shot on those tables back there. We spoke to people that have been through this process and just about why they decided to get vaccinated at an airport. Here's what they told me.
I'm here on vacation visiting my boyfriend. I was hoping to get a vaccine here because there's slim pickings back home.
I'm so pleased to see that we have travelers and a lot of employees who are coming here today to get their booster shots, making sure they have that extra level of protection against COVID-19.
Wherever we can get it, if they offer it for free, why not?
So the county health department, the governor, the California health department, they all know that travel has not been impacted by Omicron whatsoever. So that's why this is here. This will be here through the rest of the day. Next Wednesday, they're doing this again. And they have literally every shot you could ask for. Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Pfizer, both juvenile and for adults, second shots, booster shots, first-time shots, whatever you want, it's here. The tagline from airport executives is no excuses. They want everybody vaccinated, Hallie.
Listen, it's like field of dreams, but for vaccines, right? If you build it, if you put it there, they will come, and that's what's happening. You've also got news from Delta, Steve, which is sort of interesting. They're asking the CDC to shorten this quarantine period for fully vaccinated people, right, from 10 to 5 days. Explain that.
Well, it's one word. It's staffing, Hallie. The CEO wrote a letter to the director of the CDC basically saying 10 days is a long time, and you can't really argue with that, especially with the level of buildup that we're seeing at a terminal like this. So they're worried about having enough people to fill the roles which they need to. And the arguments are basically that, 90%, the director says, of his workforce has been vaccinated, that, in the past, when the policy was instituted, that there weren't vaccines and there weren't things to mitigate the virus the way there are now. So he's asking for more time. No response from the CDC as of yet. Hard to imagine they're going to issue something with this new variant now raging and rampaging through the country.
Yeah, no kidding. Steve Patterson, thank you so much. We're going to talk a lot more about the Omicron variant when we answer your questions live with Dr. John Torres a little later in the show. If you are one of the 43 million Americans who's carrying some federal student loan debt, a little bit of early Christmas cheer for you, because the Biden administration is giving you a little longer before you have to start repaying that money back again, until May 1st of 2022. Why? to give borrowers more time to deal with the pandemic fallout, especially now that the Omicron variant is surging. They're also hoping this extension will help stabilize the economy a bit. This affects a lot of people who owe a good chunk of change. Keep in mind the average student loan debt is $37,000. Joining me now is Josh Letterman, live from the North Lawn of the White House. Josh, what's interesting, we've seen the White House extend this moratorium a couple times already. Even back when former President Trump was in office, President Biden did it twice before this. The White House said, that's it. You know, we're not doing it again past January. Guess what they are, right? Why the change of heart?
Well, COVID changed, right, Hallie? I mean, Omicron, that has really changed the game. We've already seen the way the markets have been jittery, a lot of concerns about what this is going to mean if the country economically starts to move into a more restricted state and how that's going to affect student loan borrowers. And so that's one reason that played into the president's decision, according to his aides. But I think we can't just totally ignore the timing here, right? Just a few days after the Build Back Better legislation really took a major hit, now its fate completely uncertain, and the White House trying to show that President Biden is still taking action that's going to help people, even if that signature legislation hasn't been able to go through and its prospects are so uncertain. But as you point out, when they did this in September and extended it until January, they said, no more. We're not doing this again, because they thought that there was some delinquency issues of people deciding not to pay their student bills, even if they could actually afford to, because this was out there. And so here we see the White House basically reversing itself. They're not saying at this point whether or not they could extend it yet again, but it's hard to see politically how it would be any easier next year when we're into midterm year to be able to do something like that than it would be right now.
So it's one thing to defer student loan payments, right? To have people not need to pay their bills until, May of next year, basically. It's another to cancel debt altogether, right? And there's been some talk now from the president that maybe he'd support Congress passing a bill to cancel $10,000 in debt for each person. You talk about this being a midterm year we're heading into. What are the chances that something like that passes when we haven't even seen, Build Back Better pass as well?
Right. I mean, this is something President Biden's been talking about ever since the presidential campaign. And he's under a lot of pressure now, especially in the wake of Build Back Better facing these challenges, to actually cancel $50,000. A lot of liberal Democratic senators want him to do that. Now, the White House has really not wanted to get wrapped up in that. They're not sure whether that's even legal. And in fact, President Biden asked federal agencies to look into what exactly he can do legally on that. Ron Klain said recently they thought that was only going to be a few more weeks, the White House chief of staff. So far, no answers on that. So barring some type of executive action, it would mean going to Congress and asking them to take action that so far they haven't been willing to do, Hallie.
Josh Letterman, live for us there on the North Lawn. Josh, thank you. Yet another member of Congress is now under the microscope of the House committee investigating the January 6th riot. Congressman Jim Jordan. He's a Republican from Ohio, one of the more outspoken members who's been a pretty strong defender of former President Trump. The committee sent Jordan a letter just today, not a subpoena, just a letter, because they'd like to talk with him about at least one, if not multiple conversations he had with Mr. Trump on January 6th and any meetings with the former president and White House officials about strategies to try and overturn the legitimate 2020 election results. Jordan is now the second member of Congress to be asked for information from this committee after, remember, we told you about this last night, Republican Congressman Scott Perry of Pennsylvania. He denied that voluntary request. We're also learning tonight that criminals have stolen something like $100 billion worth of COVID relief money over the course of the pandemic, according to the Secret Service. This is your money. These are your tax dollars. Most of that money comes from unemployment fraud, getting diverted from programs like the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. And yeah, this is a big number, but some context here. It's just 3% of the $3.5 trillion in COVID relief that's been given out since the start of the pandemic. Some of the money's been recovered, about $2.3 billion of it, and more than 100 suspects have been arrested. Ken Delanian has been reporting on all of this. Ken, I think we can't hit that enough, right? This is not money that comes out of nowhere. This is money that comes from the taxes that everybody pays to the government that then gets dispersed. These fraudsters have snagged it, right? You've got something like 900 active investigations related to pandemic fraud. How did it get so out of hand?
Hallie, this is a disaster, and it's one of the most undercovered stories in America, so I'm glad we're covering it right now. This is an enormous sum of money. Law enforcement officials I've talked to say this is the biggest fraud in the history of the United States. And there's a couple of different factors here, but the bottom line is that the government shoveled extraordinary sums of money, pandemic relief, onto broken systems using antiquated technology. So unemployment relief, for example, is run by the states, and they use computers that go back to the 1980s. And they didn't take basic steps to verify that they were sending checks to the people who were who they said they were. So like the way Amazon is able to verify millions of transactions and have very minimal fraud online. States weren't able to do that. And so in the case of unemployment fraud, Hallie, a lot of foreign criminal groups, Nigerian fraud gangs, Chinese hackers, Russian organized crime, started bombarding these systems with stolen personal identification from the internet, and they got checks sent to them, and that money is gone. It's out of the country. So, and we're talking about sums of money that rival what's in the infrastructure bill that took so long to pass Congress and is going to be important spending. So this is a really big story, and it's really bad for the country.
It's also one of those things, Ken, where, you know, this was, especially at the time that this money was getting dispersed, this was a crisis for people, right? So there was, I think, a sense like get the money to folks because this is, in many instances, you know, if not life or death, pretty darn close to it, right? But there are some estimate swings in just how much money has been stolen. 100 billion, 400 billion. Talk me through kind of that balance of walking the line and where we are now.
Yeah, so the first thing you said is absolutely right, but experts tell me that's a false choice. The government, that you could have had both speed and efficiency. Amazon and other companies do it every day if they use the right technology. The Trump administration chose not to do that. In terms of estimates, we've been told that it's possibly as high as 400 billion stolen from unemployment, and then another 160 billion from those loan programs, Paycheck Protection and economic disaster. I went down to Miami, which is an epicenter of fraud. And just as one example, I stood in front of a house that the owners claimed was a farm, and they got like $1 million in Paycheck Protection.
You're telling me it was not a farm, Ken, huh?
Employees. It was not a farm in the middle of Miami, Hallie. But the thing to understand here is that yes, there are prosecutions. Yes, the Secret Service is doing what it can, but most of this money is gone. There aren't enough agents in the government to prosecute all the people that stole it.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, pal. I just wanted to get to this point because you're talking about what the Secret Service is doing, and quickly they've appointed this new National Pandemic Fraud Coordinator. Is that just like a real fancy title, or do you think there's teeth behind that position?
No, look, the Secret Service is very good at tracking money, and they're doing what they can. But the problem is much bigger than both the Secret Service and the FBI put together. And they will fully admit that. They're only going after the low-hanging fruit. A lot of these cases take a long time. They take many man-hours to put together, and they just don't have the staff to do it, Hallie. And so most of this money is gone.
I know you're going to stay on top of this story. Please come back. Tell us more about it. I think we want to know. Appreciate it.
Will do.
Coming up on the show, the NHL is putting the Beijing Winter Olympics on ice officially, with the league backing out of the games over COVID concerns. We'll talk about how the sports world is reacting to all this after the break. The NHL making it official today. It's keeping its players out of the Winter Olympics in Beijing in a couple months. Blame COVID. The league's already had to cancel dozens of games and even moved up its winter break, and now there's this whole Olympics thing. The NHL commissioner says, quote, the focus and goal have been and must remain to responsibly and safely complete the entirety of the NHL regular season and Stanley Cup playoffs in a timely manner. NBC Sports, which, of course, broadcasts the Olympics, says while they understand the decision, the Olympics remain the greatest hockey tournament in the world, regardless of whether the players are from the NHL or other elite leagues around the world. Eben Novy-Williams is a sports business reporter at Sportico. Eben, welcome to the show. It's good to have you on. Good evening.
Thanks for having me.
So to be clear, the U.S. is still going to participate in the Winter Olympics, right? It just won't be with the famous NHL players that we know from our leagues here in this country. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we'll harken back to days back when the NHL didn't send players at all. The most famous U.S. Olympic team, the one in 1980, the Miracle on Ice, that was a team that was not comprised of NHL players. That was a bunch of college kids. And just like happened 4 years ago in South Korea, this year in Beijing in 2021, the U.S. will be sending a group of non-NHL players again.
What does that mean from a business perspective, right? Like, does it, because you make the point in 2018, yeah, they didn't have their players play. We've seen these, college players and other athletes participate. It feels like maybe a bigger deal to fans than it does to the league,
Yeah, from the Olympic side, it's a big deal for fans. And as a result, as you mentioned there, it's a big deal for NBC. Outside of figure skating, men's Olympic hockey is probably the biggest television draw in the U.S. From a Winter Olympic standpoint. And losing players like Connor McDavid, losing players like Sidney Crosby, losing players like Alexander Ovechkin really hurts the TV product there for sure. On the NHL side, I mean, make no mistake about it, this is a financial decision through and through. Owners never like to send their players to the Olympics because they don't make any money off of it, and players can get hurt while they're over there and really hurt their product when they come back. This is obviously all of that, magnitude times 10 because of COVID and because of the cancellations that you mentioned. So NHL owners, their priority is getting the NHL season in, and if that means sacrificing players going to the Olympics, that's a decision that they will make 10 times out of 10.
What are the chances this creates a domino effect in your view? In other words, do you think other sports, now that the NHL has made this move, might rethink sending their athletes because of COVID?
So every athlete is thinking about this from a quarantine standpoint. It was the main discussion on the NHL side before the Omicron cancellations happened, which is that if you're an athlete and you test positive at the games in Beijing, there's a 3 to 5 week quarantine that you have to go through in China before you can even return home. Now, there's not a lot of sports in the Winter Olympics that have kind of the club national, the club setup that hockey does. So there's not a ton of athletes that are rushing back to play for a team that's paying them a lot more money to do that than go to the Olympics. But no question, if you're an athlete of any sort, you are definitely weighing the risk of, I could go to the Olympics, there could be an Omicron breakout, and suddenly I'm stuck in China for 3 to 5 weeks before I can even get home. And that's going to be a tricky one for a lot of athletes, I think, for sure.
That's a good point. Eben, thank you. That was a great breakdown. I learned a lot from you, friend. Thank you. Come back again. Appreciate it. We've been asking all of you to send in all of your COVID questions about this Omicron surge, and we're coming through with what you want to know, whether it's on testing, vaccines, Omicron, getting together for the holidays. Dr. John Torres is here with the answers to what you asked after the break. A trucker who killed 4 people in a crash a couple years ago, given a 110-year prison sentence. And now millions of people want to see that reduced or gone completely, including some big-name celebrities. We're going to talk about that in a second. But first, let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the House Oversight Committee in Congress is launching an investigation into Travis Scott's Astroworld Festival last month, where 10 people ended up crushed to death. The committee's focus is on how the promoter, Live Nation, got ready for the event and how it reacted to some early indications that crowd control measures just weren't working. Number 2, an NFT of the first text message ever sent has been auctioned off in Paris for more than $120,000. What did the text say? Merry Christmas. How timely. The text was sent December 3rd in 1992 and sold by the British wireless company Vodafone. Proceeds from the sale went to the UN Refugee Agency. Number 3, more storms and a lot of rain are headed to Malaysia after flooding there led to more than a dozen deaths and forced more than 60,000 people out of their homes. Officials there have been criticized for what's being called a slow response to all the destruction, but the prime minister is promising, quote unquote, improvements down the road. Number 4, if you're looking for fries in Japan from McDonald's, you may be out of luck. Supply chain problems are hurting the potato stock so badly, they'll only be serving small fries. No more medium, no more large. On the other hand, the country has too much milk right now, so it's encouraging people to drink more of that before it goes bad. Number 5, you know the most popular website in 2021? You know the more popular website even than Google? You're looking at it, TikTok, according to a new survey from web performance and security company Cloudflare. This is a huge climb up the charts for TikTok. It came in 8th last year, but hey, we've talked about it on this show. Those algorithms can be addictive. You asked. We're about to answer the key questions you have right now about Omicron. Because listen, we get it. I get it. It's making a lot of people anxious when we're already just exhausted. So we want to help you get through this holiday season the best way you can. And who better to help me with that than our very own Dr. John Torres. Dr. John, thank you for coming back. I threatened you with returning tonight to answer these questions, and you have held to your commitment, so thank you. So as I said, listen, we put it out on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and we got a lot of questions from a lot of people. We narrowed them down to ones that we think sort of reflect where folks' heads are at right now. And I want to start on Facebook, and let me pull it up. Or this viewer has a question a lot of us have ahead of the holidays. How risky is it to dine out with family if you're all vaccinated and you're all boosted?
And it's a depending. Let me try this all over. It depends. It's a matter of degrees. If you're inside, if you're indoors with people that you don't know what their vaccination status is, that's the riskiest thing you can do right now. You can go in there and you have the high potential for getting COVID because you have to remove your tests. On the other hand, if you're outdoors just with people that you know are vaccinated, not as big a risk. And so at this point, I would not go indoors to eat, but potentially outdoors depending on the situation, Hallie.
Okay, so as we're talking about family get-togethers, we have from Bavarian Erin on Twitter. She wants to know, when should I be testing myself? Before the get-togethers, after the get-togethers, or both? And listen, I'm sure both would be great. Not everybody has enough rapid tests for that. I know I don't. So what's your advice?
You know, in the best world here, what you want to do is you want to test before you go, but you also want to realize that these rapid tests that you get are good for about 6 to 12 hours. So you want to do it that morning of the event, and then again, it'll last for 6 to 12 hours.
Okay.
Afterwards, you really only want to test if you start having symptoms or if you hear of an exposure. Then you want to go ahead and test at that point. But if you don't have an exposure, if you're not showing symptoms afterwards, you really don't have a need to test at that point.
Okay. On Twitter, we got one from KCal13 who writes in about her husband. He has cancer, going through chemo, has COPD. What does she need to do to keep him safe from Omicron?
And the important thing is he's at very high risk, both because of pre-existing medical conditions and his immune status is suppressed because of the chemotherapy he's going through. The best thing she can do is to protect him from other people, meaning that anyone that comes in contact with him needs to be vaccinated and boosted at the best case scenario and should be wearing a mask as well. That's the best way you can take care of it. If he's in a situation which you don't know what the vaccination status is of other people, don't let those other people near him. Best thing you can do to keep him safe. That's
really good advice. Andrew Rowan, 128, wants to know what the strategy should be as we talk schools now. Kids are on break, students are on break, but what about universities and colleges that require vaccinations already? Because some are already announcing they're going to go online for the winter semester. Is that overkill?
Yeah, I don't think it's overkill because I think what we need here are both vaccinations and a testing strategy. We have the vaccinations, we don't have the testing strategy, and we know with Omicron that it can break through those vaccinations. You can have breakthrough infections that could spread to other people. So without a good testing strategy, that is the half of a component that you need. Then going online is reasonable. At the same time, working towards getting that testing strategy hand in hand with the vaccinations is the important part because you want these people to go back to school. You want them to be learning in that environment, and getting towards that environment is important. As
we are looking at this spike in cases right now, Tay in the Wind on Twitter wants to know if we should still be paying attention to county and local metrics, right? Those numbers that we're often seeing. You know, I look at the Washington Post here in Washington. You might look at the Denver Post in Denver on positive cases. Should that be our barometer, Dr. John, for how the pandemic is going?
Yeah, it should definitely be your barometer because you need to look at the local area you're at right now. And for example, 73% of the cases in the country are Omicron, but there are some areas, including the East Coast, that is over 90%. And so you want to see, number one, how many cases there are, number two, how many Omicron cases there are in your area, and then judge what you're going to do based on that. The most important thing is if you do go indoors with family members, ask the question, are you vaccinated? Is everyone here going to be vaccinated? And if the answer is no, I think twice about going to that event.
Okay, let me look a little bit more longer term with you here from AJH193, who hit us up on Instagram. They want to know if Omicron seems to be producing milder side effects, which is what we're seeing so far, Dr. John. Is there a possibility this could start ushering in the end of the pandemic?
There is a possibility, but what you need to remember here is that right now we just have initial information on Omicron here. And right now it looks like it has less severe side effects, and it also is causing less hospitalizations. But these are very early numbers we're getting right now, so we don't know what direction this is going to head. Plus, it's possible we could be getting another variant on top of this that could be even worse. The way we're going to get out of this is through vaccinations and keeping people separate, testing, all those things that we've been doing, wearing masks. On top of that, here's the statistics to look for. If cases go up, but hospitalizations and deaths don't go up over a couple-month time period, then we can start saying, okay, we can take a little bit of a breath. We might be getting towards the end.
Oh, boy. Do people, even hearing you say that, people are desperate for that to happen. Dr. John Torres, this was really great. Thank you so much. I may threaten to have you back tomorrow, but maybe we'll hold off till after the new year. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Turning now to a staggering sentence for a truck driver involved in a deadly Colorado crash that now has millions of people, millions, in his corner after he was sentenced to 110 years in prison this week. But even some victims' families and the judge who handed down that sentence thinks it goes too far. This is what it looked like in Colorado a couple years ago, a crash on a highway that killed 4 people. In a trial, that truck driver, Rohel Aguilera Maderos, took the stand in his own defense. He's 26. He says his brakes failed and he never meant to kill anyone. Now, nearly 5 million people have backed a petition asking the Colorado governor to commute his sentence to time served or to grant him clemency. And boy, this is blown up online, especially on TikTok. Aaron McLaughlin is following this story from L.A. Aaron, what's so interesting here is what we mentioned just a second ago. Even some of these victims' families, even the judge, aren't totally on board with the sentence. Why does it have to be 110 years?
Well, it really comes down to Colorado law. Now, it's important to understand that he was found guilty of 27 counts, including vehicular homicide. And under Colorado law, each count carries with it a minimum sentence that must be served consecutively or back to back. Thus, the extreme sentence that's stirring outrage with, as you say, the judge, even the prosecutor saying that this might have gone too far.
You also have celebs getting in on this, too. You know, Kim Kardashian West, who, you know, viewers will know has been vocal about things like pardons, commutations, et cetera, is tweeting about this directly to the Colorado governor, saying he's been a leader on supporting reforms that increase human dignity in the legal system, hoping that he'll commute the sentence here. Do we have any sense of what the governor may do? And I should note, this just came down this week, right? So this is just a couple days old, if you will, at this point.
Yeah, we reached out to Colorado Governor Polis's office. He says that, or spokesperson says rather, that he has a legal team that's currently analyzing the application. And from there, they're going to be making some sort of announcement. There's no timetable at the moment when we can expect that announcement. But the pressure on the Colorado governor, of course, is growing.
This has gone so viral, Aaron, right?
Oh, absolutely. Celebrities on TikTok, Instagram, all the social media platforms, people are outraged. That petition that you mentioned has almost 5 million signatures at this point.
Aaron McLaughlin, live for us there in L.A. Aaron, thank you so much. Coming up, a big investigation has been launched into Tesla and this feature that lets you play games on the front touchscreen of the car, right? Safety concerns? Maybe. We're going to talk about it with Jake Ward. And some NFL history. The league's first black female coach taking the field. We've got more details coming up in the local. We've heard about this thing called the Havana Syndrome. We've been reporting on it for 5 years now. But the crazy thing is we still don't really know what it is, and neither do U.S. officials. They're still looking for answers. Andrea Mitchell has more on that in tonight's backstory. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southeast Bureau, 2 people are dead after a small plane hit a paraglider near Houston. Officials say 1 person was on board each aircraft. The glider landed in somebody's yard, and the plane crashed near a shooting range. The FAA and the NTSB are looking into this. From our Southeast Bureau, we're getting a look at incredible body cam video just out from when first responders found 2 babies that survived those tornadoes in Kentucky inside their grandmother's bathtub. Their grandma had placed them there. This is it. Look at this. You see the flashlight. The grandmother had placed them there during the storms, hoping to protect them. The tornado destroyed the house, ripped the bathtub out of the ground, but look. There are the babies, safe and okay. The tub was out in her front yard, upside down, protecting the kids under it. Incredible. From our Washington Bureau, Jennifer King making history overnight as the NFL's first black female position coach. She got bumped up to head running back coach for the Washington football team when the guy who had that job, Randy Jordan, couldn't make the game because of COVID protocols. King's normal job is assistant running backs coach, and she's one of only 2 female assistant coaches in the NFL. Distracted driving's been a problem for a while now, right? Ever since phones in the car became really common. But Tesla may be upping the ante here with a new feature that lets people in the car play video games. It's called Passenger Play. And today, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says it's going to investigate this whole system, which is meant for, as the name implies, passengers in the car, but which is raising some real questions about whether the drivers putting the car on autopilot could be driving while gaming, too. Jake Ward is here to help us understand more about this. Jake, first, can you talk about what this is, right? Because this investigation, these documents don't list any crashes or injuries. This is coming from somebody who complained after seeing he could drive around playing a video game, even like getting online.
That's right, Hallie. And a everyday Tesla owner, a guy who says he loves his car, went out and drove it around in circles in where he lives in Portland, Oregon, after watching a YouTube video that he saw in which he saw this feature. And sure enough, he discovered that you can play a video game while you are driving the car alone in the car. And so he filed a complaint with the NHTSA, which, as you know, has regulatory authority to enforce all sorts of stringent standards. I mean, the thing that is so crazy about this, Hallie, is that, you know, having covered technology in the auto industry for a long time, you know, those companies are incredibly motivated to talk about safety. I mean, they really, you know, you cannot joke around about it with them. They will not riff about it with you. They are very serious about making sure you know they are deadly serious about this. So to see a car company build something in that is so obviously distracting is pretty shocking, and that certainly is what seems to have made its way up to the NHTSA.
So is Tesla responding to this? Because it seems like they'd want to, based on what you just said.
Yeah, they have not responded directly, certainly not reaching out to us. As you know, that they have disbanded the media relations department there, and so there's really no way in to find out exactly how they are responding. But they are, as you know, under investigation across many different things. So at this point, we don't really know what their response is going to be. But it is, again, just an amazing thing to be standing here in front of you saying a car company that built a video game into its dashboard is in trouble with authorities.
So if the government comes out and says, no, that's bananas, right? Is it a matter of Tesla pulling that feature off, right? Like some code or software or hardware thing? Sorry,
right.
Jake.
The good news here, right, is that Tesla is. I mean, it's true. You're absolutely correct. They are totally capable of doing that. You know, they have all kinds of software-based features built into the entertainment system. If you drive a Tesla currently, you would drive one, you know, that has, for instance, a karaoke feature that's in theory for the passenger. You have to press a button that says, you know, only the passenger will use it. But if I'm driving alone in a Tesla, I certainly can use that as well. They are capable of pulling all of these out. I mean, at this point, you know, supposedly this would, in theory, affect about 540,000 cars. It's all 4 models that Tesla makes. And so, you know, the bad news is it affects a lot of people. The good news here is that because it's software-based, they could just pull it if they wanted to.
Didn't something happen like this similarly with Mercedes, right? There was a recall when there was some computer thing that let drivers get on the internet, right? Why would it be any different in this instance? Like, why should we think the outcome would be any different for Tesla?
That's right. I mean, in this case, you know, Mercedes said it was basically just a mistake, that they created a system that could accidentally allow you to sort of browse the web while you're driving around, and so they took it off immediately, because, again, that is sort of in the ethos of car making. In this case, you know, it's not clear exactly why there'd be any different response here, why the NHTSA would have any less authority with Tesla. You know, they've been able to enforce all kinds of things. I mean, you and I, if we buy a new car right now, there have to be backup cameras built into those cars because the NHTSA requires it, right? They have tremendous authority. So in theory, they should be able to come in and get on board this. But, you know, again, just a very, very unusual thing. I'm sure the NHTSA people, you know, looked at this and thought, really? And I'm really curious to see how they're going to respond to it.
Real quick, Jake, you mentioned some of these other investigations that Tesla is under, right? Like this big one on the Autopilot system. Do we know where that stands?
Yeah. You know, here's the crazy thing is we do not know where that stands, and in part that may be because back in October of this year, Tesla actually put in a memo to the NHTSA requesting total confidentiality on their responses to the NHTSA's questions. Typically, that is a matter of public record, and journalists like us can look at it, but in this case, Tesla has requested that it all be kept secret, and so that investigation of about 24 accidents based on an Autopilot system, we simply do not know where that stands at the moment.
Jake Ward live for us with all of that. Jake, thank you so much. Coming up here on the show, a possible crack in the JonBenet Ramsey case. 25 years after her murder, police now say they're looking to use advanced DNA technology to look for new leads. We're going to have more on what police are saying now and what they hope to find next. Time to get the backstory now, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. And tonight we're talking about this mysterious sickness that's hit American diplomats and spies all around the world called the Havana Syndrome. It all started back in 2016 when some U.S. officials in Havana, in Cuba, suddenly got really sick, really nauseous, really dizzy. We started hearing about similar stories, case after case. And now here we are 5 years later with more than 200 of these kinds of cases reported all around the world. And the wild thing is nobody's 100% sure why it's happening or how or who might be attacking these Americans. Experts think whatever the cause is, it's invisible, maybe something to do with directed energy or microwave weapon attacks. The American officials affected by it have reported symptoms like chronic headaches, ear pain, head pressure, and insomnia, stuff that hasn't gone away, with part of the mystery centering on where this is all coming from. NBC News first reported in 2018 that American intelligence officials suspected Russia's to blame, but they haven't been able to prove it. And now a former U.S. intelligence official is suing the Defense Department in connection with an overseas incident that happened decades ago that he thinks is connected to the Havana Syndrome. With me now is Andrea Mitchell, who, as our loyal viewers will know, has been traveling the world covering Havana Syndrome for NBC News for years now. Andrea, it's great to have you on.
Thanks. It's great to be with you, Hallie.
Let's go back to the beginning when you first started reporting on this in 2017. And our viewers are about to see some video of you out there. You've been, to Paris. You've been to Cuba on this. They started to get really sick. There wasn't a lot more to go on than that. Can you talk a little bit? Bring us behind the scenes with you. How did you get sources to even talk to you in the first place? How did you get victims to talk to you? Because this is really sensitive stuff.
Well, it's very sensitive stuff, and a lot of these people are State Department people or CIA people who were still trying to get their care covered. They were trying to get into Walter Reed. They were trying to get the State Department to take them seriously, and for a long time, they weren't taken seriously. And so persuading them to go public was really a team effort, I have to say. Talking to them, reassuring them that we were going to tell their stories as honestly as possible and, listen to them, hear their pain, and understand what they were going through. And these are very private people. A lot of these people had worked in the shadows for years or had been at the State Department working very much behind the scenes and did not want to go public. Finally, I think that they felt that they were helping their colleagues because it's a large group of people who are not being listened to and for a long time were not being taken seriously.
On the flip side, you've got, you've talked to Cuban officials, right, who have again and again denied their governments to blame, right? Like, clearly, they're not going to come out and say, yeah, Andrea Mitchell, we did it. It's our fault, right? How do you approach an interview that you know is going to be a little bit difficult?
Well, in fact, the Cuban people, in all of my reporting and in what U.S. officials believe, were not responsible. Right. There was an attempt, I believe, for ideological reasons by a previous administration, by the Trump administration, to use this as a convenient excuse, and it was understandable. They wanted to get people home safely without knowing what it was that was causing it. So they managed to undo the Obama policy of normalizing relations. They basically took everybody back from the embassy that was established, and everyone from Cuba, working in Washington left as well. So it was really freezing the relationship for reasons of the Havana Syndrome, but it fit very well with what Trump and Secretary Pompeo preferred to do. That said, even people in the Biden administration in the State Department were not really responsive. We're still suggesting, could it be psychological, psychosomatic? And that really undermined the case. Now, in terms of the Cuban officials, very few people believe that Cuba was responsible. This has now happened in every continent except Antarctica.
Right.
Cuba doesn't have outposts. They don't have that kind of global reach. There are very few. Perhaps Russia and China have that kind of global reach. And Cuba denied it, still denies it, and in all of our reporting we've said that there's absolutely no evidence Cuba is responsible, and it is unfortunate for their sake that it's known as the Havana Syndrome because that's where it started.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. When you talk about the sensitivities here, what's so interesting, too, is you are trying to get answers. And this happens a lot in our line of work, as you know. You try to get answers from government officials on the U.S. side who don't really want to tell you or who maybe are still sorting it out. And in this, it's really complicated, right? You've got people who are potentially undercover, people who are diplomats in these sensitive positions. Talk about, as much as you can, how you navigate those official U.S. sources when you're writing or when you're getting ready to script a story like this.
Well, very carefully, but also you have to be firm with sources and you have to keep pressing. And there have been times when, we got a lot of pushback. And frankly, the U.S. government still calls this anomalous health incidents, or AHI. And that is really deeply offensive to a lot of these victims, where scientists have confirmed that they are suffering from brain damage. And they are experiencing symptoms that are completely disabling. They've lost their careers. They've lost their livelihood. And now the U.S. Congress has decided, and this is bipartisan, this is Marco Rubio and Jeanne Shaheen and Susan Collins and a lot of other people who got involved, and large majorities decided to pass this Havana Act, which was signed into law in October by President Biden, and this will compensate these victims. The problem is, I've read this law again tonight just to double check with myself. It says that people who have qualified brain injuries qualify for compensation, and their families, their dependents. But they have yet to define what is a qualified brain injury. And there's a long way to go between the Act and April, which is the deadline for them to begin to have a plan to compensate them.
And I know in April and well beyond that, you will be all over this story. Andrew Mitchell, it is so great to have you on the show for the backstory tonight. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you, and happy holidays, Hallie.
Thanks, Andrew.
I hope you're going to get some time off.
See you in 2022. Appreciate it.
You bet.
New technology may mean new leads in a 25-year-old murder mystery that had so many people so invested in a little girl named JonBenet Ramsey. She was 6 years old when she was reported missing from her family's house in Colorado, but was found dead in the basement hours later in a case that's never been solved. This was a huge story at the time it happened in 1996. Headlines everywhere. Her parents and her brother, suspects, they spent pretty much the next couple years under scrutiny. Years later, 2008, investigators concluded an unknown male, not a family member, was responsible, but nobody was arrested in a case that's been featured in true crime books, documentaries, movies, you name it. And now there's this new twist, the potential for figuring out what happened, because police in Boulder have just announced they're now using genetic DNA processes to hopefully determine who's responsible for killing that little girl, who would be 31 years old if she were alive today. Jim Cavanaugh is here to break this down for us. Jim, let me just start with what I feel like is just the obvious question here. DNA technology is not totally brand new. Why did it take so long for Boulder police to say they're using this to try to figure out this unsolved case?
Well, it's gotten better with age, like many things do. DNA technology, Hallie, has evolved so much. It's gotten better. The touch DNA technology is very much improved. And, you know, they're using this familia DNA to solve serial cases like the Grim Sleeper in California and the Golden State Killer. So, and many other murders around the country that are 30 and 40 years old. So there's a lot of new scientific breakthroughs, and the Boulder PD detectives are on top of that and pushing that.
That's interesting, especially because JonBenet's father told NBC News there's a number of items that were found at the scene that were never actually tested for DNA evidence. We don't know much more about what Boulder police are doing, though, right? They kind of came out and said, yeah, we're continuing to actively work this case, but they're not giving us timelines. They're not answering a ton of questions about this. Talk about what investigators have as far as options here.
Well, you know, with DNA, you have a federal database called CODIS, where the FBI administers it, and the law enforcement can submit samples to that. And if someone's DNA is in there, like a criminal, a pedophile, someone who's been arrested, and their DNA has been secured, it can get a match. States run similar databases, but that's the limit to the police databases. But now they're using these public databases like familia DNA,
right,
where people are trying to trace their ancestry, and so it's a wider swath of the population, and the police, because it's public information, can use that. Hallie, we got to remember about this case. This is a 6-year-old girl. Her head was bashed in. She had a garrote around her neck. She had duct tape on her mouth, and her wrists were bound. And she was found in the basement of her home the morning after Christmas Day. It's a brutal case. America wants the case solved.
Yeah.
Will this solve the case? You know, it's not DNA alone that can solve the case. We like to think of that. I mean, we see that on CSI and we hear about a breakthrough. But really, in a case like this, DNA is one aspect. It's the totality of the circumstances that the detectives can put together. Because touch DNA can be left by people that are even not the killer. So there was DNA found on JonBenet's underpants, suspected a drop of blood. There was DNA on Long John's from maybe a third person, a couple of different males, plus her DNA. And is some of that DNA from more than one person, so it's useless? Is it from just someone touching a garment that could have been almost anyone? Just a quick example, if you and I were to touch a gun, we used to swab guns for DNA and ATF all the time. We got DNA off exploded pipe bombs, so that's how good the technology can be.
Yeah.
But if you and I handled a gun, and then I went out and committed a murder with the gun, and the gun was swabbed, they could find my DNA, or your DNA, or both our DNA, or no one's DNA on that gun. So what would it tell you, for example, if your DNA was on the gun? It would only tell us that you at some time had touched the gun. And so then it would mean agents would have to go and ask you where you were. Could we prove you were somewhere else at the time of the murder? We've had cases like that, suspected someone, and then found out they were in a factory working, and we have video of them working during the time of the murder, 100 miles away, so they could not have done it. So there's a lot more investigation that needs to be done. And I think I would salute the Boulder police detectives for staying on it, bringing it up. There was early mistakes for sure, but they're staying on it. Maybe they'll get lucky. I think it's a slim chance they'll break it, though, Hallie. Maybe a 5% chance, but they're trying.
Well, even a 5% chance, right? Probably better than 0%. So, Jim Kavanaugh, that's important perspective.
No, that's right.
Important context. Thank you so much, Jim. Appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for watching this hour of Hallie Jackson Now. More for you right here, same time, same place tomorrow. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.